Sword been there for 300 years, and no one on Velthos had ever touched it twice. That was the rumor, anyway. The one they whispered in the market stalls of Kethvara City. The one that kept even the bravest Arksavani warriors at a respectful 10-step distance whenever the ancient procession passed through the central plaza. Logan had heard it on his third day on the planet, from a merchant with 6 fingers on each hand and eyes the color of deep ocean trenches. He hadn't believed it then. He believed it now, standing in the rain at the edge of a crowd so silent it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing, watching a young Arksavani woman collapse to her knees in the mud before a sword that wouldn't move. What no one in that crowd knew, what Logan hadn't told anyone since arriving on Velthos on what was officially listed as a diplomatic survey mission, was that he had seen this sword before. Not in a museum, not in a photograph transmitted across 40 light years of deep space relay. In a dream, sharp and specific and recurring, for the last 11 years of his life. He pressed himself deeper into the crowd, collar up against the driving rain, and told himself that didn't matter. That he was here to observe, to document, to file his quiet reports back to the UFS Titan in orbit above. That whatever was happening in that plaza was none of his business. Then the woman looked up, and he saw the blood on her hands, and he took a step forward before his mind had finished arguing with itself. Her name, he would learn later, was Thyra, junior keeper of the Rite of Ancestral, youngest of her lineage to ever attempt the calling. She was not supposed to be here alone. She was not supposed to be here at all. Something had gone very wrong before Logan arrived, and it was about to get much worse. The Rite of Ancestral happened once every generation on Velthos, timed to the convergence of the planet's twin moons, and it was considered the single most important ceremonial event in Arksavani culture. Logan had read the briefing documents thoroughly, the way he read everything, twice, methodically, underlining what didn't quite make sense and returning to it. He understood the broad strokes. The ancestral sword, called the Velkashar in the Old Tongue, meaning roughly the weight of becoming, was planted each cycle in the plaza's central stone. Warriors of notable lineage would attempt to lift it. Theoretically, one would succeed, and that success would designate the next high voice, the spiritual and political figurehead of the Arksavani nation collective. In practice, no one had succeeded in over 200 years. The high voice position had been held in succession by the previous holder's chosen council instead, and the sword had become more symbolic than functional, a beautiful and slightly embarrassing reminder of a tradition that no longer quite worked. Logan's briefing documents had been written by a bureaucrat in an orbital station who had never set foot on Velthos, and they were wrong about almost everything that mattered. What the documents hadn't conveyed, what you could only understand by being present, by feeling the pressure in the air and the stillness in the crowd, was how desperately the Arksavani still believed. Not symbolically, not as cultural performance. They believed the way humans believed in gravity, as a fact of the universe, one that the universe simply hadn't been kind enough to demonstrate lately. Thyra's family had held the position of keeper for 11 generations. Her father had died 2 weeks ago. Logan had not known this, it wasn't in any document. And in the ancient code of the Rite, a keeper's death within 40 days of the ceremony transferred the duty of guardianship to the eldest available bloodline member. That was her brother. Her brother was also dead, killed in the territorial skirmishes on Velthos's eastern continent that the diplomatic corps had diplomatically chosen not to call a war, which meant it fell to Thyra, 23 years old, barely trained for the secondary role, never trained for the primary. Alone in the rain with her keeper's robes already soaked through, her hands bleeding from the ceremonial preparation cuts she had performed without assistance because there was no one left to perform them with her. Standing before a sword that had defeated every warrior the Arksavani nation had produced in living memory. She had not been assigned a formal military escort because she was not supposed to be the one doing this. No one had thought to send one. Logan had been watching from the edge of the eastern colonnade, making quiet notations on his handheld recorder when he'd seen her stumble during the approach walk. Seen how she'd caught herself on the stone railing, how she'd looked quickly to see if anyone had noticed, how she'd squared her shoulders and kept walking with precisely the kind of dignity that cost something. He'd recognized that particular posture immediately. He'd worn it himself, for 3 years running, before he'd finally stopped pretending. He stopped making notes and started paying attention. The moment that changed everything was not dramatic. That was the part that stayed with him afterward, how ordinary the hinge of it was. She had reached the sword. She had completed the invocation words, her voice steady and carrying despite the rain, and the gathered crowd had been watching with the combined intensity of thousands of people who wanted something to be true. She had placed both hands on the Velkashar's hilt, taken 3 centering breaths that Logan could see from 40 feet away, and pulled. The sword hadn't moved. That was expected. The sword never moved. What wasn't expected was what happened next. In the ceremonial protocol, a failed attempt was met with a formal recession. The keeper stepped back, bowed, and the ceremony concluded with a period of communal reflection. It was disappointing but dignified. Logan had read about this part. What Thyra did instead was pull again. And again. Her whole body shaking with the effort, her feet sliding in the mud, her prepared dignity crumbling under the weight of something Logan didn't yet have a word for. She wasn't being stubborn. She was being desperate in the way that people are desperate when something matters more than appearances, more than dignity, more than what anyone watching will think. The crowd made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp, more like a collective held breath. She fell to her knees. Her hands, already cut from the preparation rites, were bleeding freely now from the grip. Her head dropped forward, and Logan was already moving. He didn't decide to move. He simply was moving, the way you move when someone falls near you, and the instinct fires before the reasoning catches up. He was through the ceremonial barrier, technically illegal, technically a diplomatic incident waiting to happen, before the nearest crowd marshal had registered that a human male was crossing sacred ground in the rain with absolutely no authorization whatsoever. He reached her and crouched down, and she looked up, and her eyes were the dark amber of deep resin, and they were full of something that looked like fury until you looked at it long enough to recognize it as grief. "Okay," he said quietly, in the way you speak to someone on the edge. "Okay, you're okay." On Velthos, the phrase, "you're okay," was an extremely intimate declaration of intent. It meant, in the ancient register of the language, approximately, "I witness you, and I choose you." It was something you said to a bonded partner, or a blood sibling, or someone you had decided to die alongside. Logan did not know this. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the small folded cloth he always kept there. Not for any ceremonial reason, just because he was the kind of person who carried a handkerchief out of old habit. And he took her bleeding hands and pressed the cloth against them with the careful, matter-of-fact gentleness of someone who had once spent 2 years as a field medic and never quite stopped thinking that way. The crowd did not breathe. Thyra stared at her own hands, wrapped in foreign cloth held by foreign fingers, and her expression cycled through so many things in so short a time that Logan couldn't track all of them. "You should not be here," she said in standard trade speech, her voice almost steady. "Probably not," he agreed. He didn't let go of her hands. "This ground is sacred to my people. You are an outsider. You have no standing here." "I know." "Then why?" "Because you were bleeding alone in the rain," he said simply, "and I was right there." Something moved across her face then, a crack in something that had been sealed very tightly. She looked away from him, toward the sword, and her jaw tightened. "I have failed," she said. "The right is broken. The lineage ends with me." "The ceremony failed," Logan said carefully. "That's not the same thing as you failing." She looked back at him as though he had said something in a language she didn't have a word for, which, in a way, he had. The crowd marshals arrived 30 seconds later, and Logan was very politely and very firmly escorted off the sacred ground. He didn't resist. He kept looking back at Thyra as he went, and she kept watching him with those amber eyes, and the handkerchief was still wrapped around her hands. That should have been the end of it. It very nearly was. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and loud. His supervisor on the Titan, a stern woman named Director Voss, who had strong opinions about protocol and even stronger opinions about junior surveyors who violated ceremonial law on their 3rd week of assignment, sent him a message with so many formal reprimand flags attached that it took 2 minutes just to load. He was confined to the human settlement quarter of Kethvara, pending a cultural mediation review. He ate bad, reconstituted protein for 3 days and tried not to think about amber eyes and a sword he had dreamed about for 11 years. On the 4th day, someone knocked on his door at 3 in the morning. It was Thyra. She was no longer in the keeper's robes. She wore plain traveling clothes, dark and practical, with her hood up against the night, and she looked like someone who had made a decision and was not at peace with it, but had made it anyway. He opened the door wider without speaking. "I should not be here either," she said. "This makes us equal in transgression." "Come in," he said. "I'll make tea. It's not good tea, but it's warm." She came in and stood in the center of his small room with the rigid posture of someone whose entire culture had trained them to never look uncertain in unfamiliar spaces. She looked uncertain. She was hiding it well, but he recognized it, the same way he recognized that shoulder-squaring walk from the plaza, and he didn't say anything about it, just moved around her to the small heating unit and made tea. She watched him with intense suspicion, which was fair. He was, objectively, an alien. "You said you're okay to me," she said finally. "In the plaza." "I did." "Do you know what that means, in the old speech?" He paused, cup in hand. "Tell me." She told him. He set the cup down. "I'm sorry," he said with genuine alarm. I only meant to say you were going to be all right, that you were safe." "I know," she said, and then quietly, as if she was reporting a fact she found inconvenient. "It did not matter that you didn't know. It felt true anyway." There was a silence during which Logan made a point of looking at the tea and not at her, because some things need room. "Why did you come here?" he asked eventually. "Because you touched the sacred ground with no standing and no protection and no reason except that I was bleeding." She sat down without being invited, which suggested she was more comfortable than she was letting on. "Among my people, that is not something a stranger does. It is something the word does not translate exactly, a vouched person, someone who has already decided that your life matters before they know anything about you." "Is that unusual?" She looked at him as if he were very slow. "We are at war with our eastern neighbors. We have been at war, in various forms, for 400 years. We do not have vouched people among the living. We have allies and we have assets and we have liabilities." She picked up the tea he set before her and held it in both hands. "My father was the last person who, and now he is gone." Logan sat down across from her and waited. "He died believing the sword would move," she said. "Not for him. He knew it would not be him. He died believing it would move for someone, and that when it did, everything that is breaking would be given a chance to mend." She looked into the tea. "I am not certain I believe that. I am not certain I believe anything anymore. But I went to the right because he asked me to, before he died, and I could not leave him without an answer." "What did he ask you exactly?" She was quiet for a long moment. He said, "The sword does not test strength. It tests the quality of the silence you carry inside yourself." She looked up at Logan. I have never understood what he meant. Logan thought about 11 years of a recurring dream, about a sword planted in stone and rain and the feeling of the hilt in his hand, that specific, impossible feeling of a thing that fit exactly right, about why he had requested this assignment, this planet, this particular posting over three others that were safer and better for his career, about what he had told Director Voss when she'd asked him why Velthos. He had said research interests. He had not told her about the dreams. "I think I might," he said. She stared at him. "I know how this sounds," he said. "I know what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like something you hear from a person who should not be trusted with sacred things. But I've been dreaming about that sword since I was 19 years old. The same dream. Rain. A plaza that I had never seen a photograph of before I requested this assignment. And a sword that I could feel in the dream. The weight of it, the way the grip settled." Tira did not move. Her face had gone very still, in the way of someone who has decided to hear everything before they decide what it means. "I didn't tell my superiors because they would have pulled the assignment. I didn't tell anyone because there is no reasonable explanation, and I am a person who works in documented fact." He looked at her directly. "But you asked me why a stranger would touch sacred ground for someone they didn't know. The honest answer is that I don't think I was a stranger to this place. I don't know what that means or what to do with it. But you came here at 3 in the morning, and I think you deserve the honest answer." The silence that followed was the kind that contains an enormous amount of movement. "My father also dreamed," Tira said at last, "of a person from far away. He said, this person would carry a different kind of silence than we know. Not the silence of restraint or discipline, the silence of someone who has lost something and learned to carry the space it left behind." Logan said nothing, which was, perhaps, the most eloquent response he could have offered. "He said that person would lift the sword," Thyra said, "and I told him that was a story old men tell when they are frightened of dying without a resolution." She set down her tea. "I am not certain I was kind to him in those last weeks." "You came to the right alone in the rain," Logan said. "That's what kindness looks like when it's expensive." The crack that had appeared in the plaza split open, fully, and she closed her eyes and did not speak for a long moment, and Logan sat with her in it without flinching or filling the silence. When she opened her eyes, something had changed in her face, not softened exactly, but reconfigured, like a map that now showed terrain it had previously been leaving blank. "Come back with me," she said, "to the plaza." "The mediation review. I am the last keeper of the Velkashar line," she said. "My standing supersedes diplomatic review. I am formally extending a vouched invitation under the ancient right of guest right." She paused. "I am also telling you that if you do not come, I will spend the rest of my life wondering, and I do not have the patience for that." He did not debate it. The plaza at 3 in the morning was empty and rain-washed, the stones glistening under Velthos's twin moons, both full and low on the horizon, turning everything silver and deep. The Velkashar rose from its stone at the center, a sword of dark metal with a grip wound in something that had once been living, and etchings along the flat of the blade that Thyra walked close enough to read aloud as they approached. "The weight of becoming is carried by the one who has already been broken by it." Logan stopped walking. "My father had that translated for me when I was young," Thyra said. "I thought it was morbid." "It's a prerequisite," Logan said. He understood it completely, in a way that bypassed language and went straight to the center of something he had been a long time learning to name. The thing he had lost at 19, a teammate, a deployment gone wrong, the specific weight of surviving something you were not supposed to survive alone, and the silence that had replaced it, the silence he had carried through 3 reassignments and 2 academic certifications, and 1 very clinical description of research interests to Director Voss. He walked to the sword. He placed his hands on the grip. The handkerchief Thyra had returned to him before they left his quarters, cleaned, folded, handed back with the gravity of something being returned to its proper owner, was wrapped around his palm. That same cloth. The small, unremarkable piece of fabric he had pressed against her bleeding hands in the rain. He did not think about lifting. He thought about the weight he already carried. He thought about what his father had told him once, that grief is not a thing to put down, but a thing to integrate, to let become part of the structure. He thought about Tyra's father dying with hope in his chest. He thought about a young woman walking a sacred path alone because she had made a promise to someone she loved. He lifted. The Velkashar came free of the stone with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. He stood there in the silver moonlight, holding an ancient sword he had dreamed of for 11 years, and he had no framework for what had just happened. And it didn't matter, because Thyra was making a sound he had not heard her make before, something between a laugh and a broken exhale, and she was looking at him with an expression that he realized, slowly, was the look of someone who has just discovered that hope was not, after all, a story old men tell. He set the sword carefully back in its stone because it was not his to keep, and he knew it. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, "The whole plaza will have recorded this. The sensors are always active during the right period. By morning it won't matter what I am," he said. "They'll figure out what to do with it." "You are not afraid?" He thought about it. "I'm afraid of a lot of things. This isn't one of them." She reached out and touched the cloth still wrapped around his hand. Not taking it, just touching it, the way you touch something to verify it's real, and looked up at him with those amber eyes that had been full of fury and grief, and now held something quieter and more durable than either. "I do not know what you are to my people," she said. "The texts will argue about this for generations. Theologians will disagree. There will be factions." "Sounds exhausting," he said. "It will be," she agreed, with the first real, unguarded smile he had seen from her, small and a little wry, and absolutely transformative in her face. "But I know what you are to me." She didn't say what that was. She didn't need to. The twin moons of Velthos hung low and full above them, and the rain had stopped, and somewhere in the city, early shift workers were beginning to move, and the sensors in the plaza had been recording since they arrived, and by morning the footage would be everywhere, and the diplomatic incident would escalate to something Director Voss didn't have a reprimand category for, and nothing, not a single thing, about this situation was going to be simple or clean or easy to explain in a filed report. Logan stood in the silver light with a piece of cloth wrapped around his hand and a young keeper standing beside him, and 11 years of a dream now fully paid, and thought that some things are not meant to be explained. They are meant to be carried, together, with all the weight, all the way.